He had buried a wife, a child, and every soft thing he ever let himself want, and after that no meant no. The widows came. The daughters came. The well-meaning church women came with pie and patience and a list of reasons a man shouldn't grow old alone. For 11 years he refused them all, and for every refusal he carved one small wooden bird and shut it away in a box that nobody was allowed to open. He figured he'd keep saying no until they laid him in the ground beside her. Then a woman whose grief was older and harder than his own looked at that box of birds and said a few quiet words he could not, for the life of him, refuse. This is the story of the cowboy who would not be loved, and the low, steady voice that finally stopped him cold. Stay with me. Because the thing that breaks him open isn't a kiss and it isn't a fight. It's the truth, and it's been sitting in that box the whole time. I said no to Cora Harmon on a Tuesday, standing in the doorway of my own barn with a curry comb still in my hand. And I remember thinking that the light coming through the loft slats made her look kinder than the moment deserved. She'd walked the 2 miles out from town in her good shoes. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the words, the shoes. Dust to the ankle, one heel worn to a slant, and she'd walked all that way to stand in front of a man everybody in Sage Fork knew would tell her no. You don't have to answer today, she said. I do, though, I said. It's not fair to make you wait on a thing that isn't going to change. Her chin went up a little. She was a proud woman, Cora, widowed young when the fever took Tom, and she deserved a great deal better than a cattleman who whittled birds in the dark and talked to his horse more than to people. She looked at me a long moment, and I watched her decide not to cry in front of me, which I respected more than anything she could have said. 11 years, Eli, she said. You know what folks call you. I do. The ward that wards everybody off. She almost smiled at her own joke. That's Delia Prout's line. She's proud of it. It's a good line. It's a lonely line. She pulled her shawl tighter, though it wasn't cold. I'm not asking you to love me. I buried love same as you. I'm asking whether two people who already know the worst of it might make the back half of their lives a little less quiet. That's all. That's the whole of it. And God help me, it was a reasonable thing to ask. That was what made it hard. If she'd come at me with poetry, I could have laughed it off. But she came at me with arithmetic. 2 lonelinesses might add up to something smaller than the sum of them, and arithmetic is difficult to argue with when it's true. I said no anyway. I don't have a clean reason for you. I've turned it over enough nights to know there isn't one. The closest I can get is this. Saying yes would have meant Ada was finished. Over. A thing that happened once and ended. And I could not make my mouth agree to that. Not for Cora Harmon, not for anybody, not if the whole town lined up in their walking shoes. Cora nodded like she'd expected it, which shamed me. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached out and touched the back of my hand, the one holding the comb, just for a second, the way you'd steady something that was about to fall. You're going to run out of people to say no to, she said. And then it'll just be you and that horse and whatever it is you keep in that box. I hadn't known anybody knew about the box. She walked back to town in her worn shoes. I watched until she was a small dark stitch on the road, and then I went inside and did the thing I always did. I carved a bird. I ought to explain the birds, since they're the truest thing about me and the part I like least to say out loud. I keep a cigar box under the floorboard beneath the bed, the loose one, third from the wall. Inside that box are the birds. Small ones, most of them no bigger than my thumb, cut from whatever softwood I've got, cottonwood mostly, sometimes pine. Wrens and sparrows and one owl I'm proud of and a couple that don't rightly resemble any bird God made. I don't paint them, I don't sell them, I don't give them away. The rule is simple. Every time I refuse somebody, every proposal, every hint, every well-meaning church supper where a mother steered her daughter into the chair beside mine, I carve a bird and I put it in the box and I shut the lid. I started it the second winter, when the widow, Alcott's brother, came around suggesting I might do worse than his sister. I don't know why a bird. Ada liked birds. She'd stand at the window of the little house we had before this one and name them for me, and I never could keep them straight, and she'd laugh at me, this low, pleased laugh like a creek moving under ice, and say, Eli Ward, you can read a cow's whole mood off the flick of an ear, but you can't tell a finch from a fool. The morning she died, there was a meadowlark on the fence post. I remember it because I wanted to shoot it. I wanted to shoot it out of the sky for having the nerve to sing while she went cold in the next room, and I didn't, and I've regretted the not shooting and the wanting to in equal measure ever since. So, birds. I counted them sometimes late, when sleep wouldn't come. That Tuesday night after Cora, I laid them out on the quilt in the lamplight and counted, and there were 31. 31 no's. 31 people I'd sent walking back down my road in whatever shoes they'd worn to ask. 31, and I was 44 years old, and my hands had started to ache in the mornings the way my father's had before the winter that finished him, and I lay there looking at a box of little dead-eyed wooden birds, and I thought, Cora's right. I am going to run out. Then I put them back in the box, and I put the box under the floor, and I told myself what I always told myself, which was that a man is allowed to keep faith with his dead if he wants to, and that faith isn't the same as being a fool, whatever Delia Prout says. I believed it too. I'd believe it for a while yet. You should know about the ranch, so you understand what kind of quiet I'm talking about. I run cattle on the flats south of Sage Fork, up against the foothills where the country starts to buckle and rise toward the Chiricahua Peaks. It's hard land and honest land. It doesn't lie to you. If you don't get up, the stock doesn't get watered. And if the stock doesn't get watered, you don't eat. And there is a bracing simplicity in that arrangement that has kept me alive through years I did not much want to survive. I had a hand for a while, a Mexican boy named Tomaz who was worth 3 of me, but he moved on to a bigger outfit near Wilcox, and I never replaced him. It's more than one man can do, really, this place. I just do less of it than 2 men should, and let the rest go, and the ranch has gotten shabby around the edges in the way that a man living alone gets shabby around the edges, both of us fraying at the same slow rate. My mornings went like this. Up before light, coffee I could stand a spoon in. Out to the horses, I had 4 then, and the good one, the buckskin, was named Judith after nobody, just a name I liked. Fences, water, the endless arithmetic of grass and rain and how many head the land would carry. Noon I'd eat standing up. Afternoons the same as mornings, but hotter. Evenings I'd sit on the step with the last of the light and whittle, not always a bird, sometimes just shaving a stick down to nothing, which is a thing lonely men do to feel their hands are still good for something. And I talked to Judith. I'm not ashamed of it. A man needs to hear a voice, even his own, and a horse is a better listener than most people because it never once tells you what you ought to do about your life. Cora came, I told her that evening, forking hay. Walked the whole way. I said no. Judith flicked an ear. I know, I said. I know what you think. You think I'm a coward and a fool and I keep a box of birds like some old woman keeps a box of buttons. I dropped the fork. You think I ought to just once. I didn't finish it. I never finished that sentence in 11 years. I always got right up to the lip of it and stepped back, the way you step back from the edge of a wash when the ground starts to give. That was the shape of my life. You'd be forgiven for thinking nothing could change it. I certainly thought so. I'd made a kind of peace with the smallness of my days, and if that peace was really just grief that had gone quiet and cold and hard as a river stone, well, a stone doesn't hurt. A stone doesn't feel anything at all. There are worse things to be than a stone. I believed that, too. She came into the story on a day the well ran low. It was the tale of a bad, dry stretch, late in the summer, the kind of drought that makes the whole country hold its breath. My well was giving me mud by the bucket, and I had 40 head starting to gaunt. And I'd made the decision, a hard one, the first genuinely hard decision I'd made in a long while, to drive the weakest dozen up into the foothills where there was a seep spring I hadn't used in years. On the edge of country the Chiricahua still moved through, quiet in those years after the surrender, when the ones who hadn't been sent east lived scattered and careful, and mostly out of sight of white men who'd as soon shoot them as look. I found the seep still running, thin but running, and I found that I was not the only one who knew about it. There was a wiki up near the spring, a low brush shelter well made, the kind that says somebody meant to stay a while, and a cook fire cold, and a woman standing between me and the water with a knife held down along her leg where a careless man wouldn't have seen it. I saw it. I've been around enough hard people to always look at the hands. She didn't say anything. She just stood there and looked at me and let me understand the arrangement, that this was her water now that she'd found it first, that she was one woman alone against a mounted man with a rifle on his saddle, and she was not going to move. I want to tell you I was gracious about it. I wasn't not right off. I was tired and scared for my stock, and I'd ridden 3 hours in the heat, and the first thing I felt was the ugly reflexive thing a man of my time and place felt, which was that she was in my way. I'm not proud of it. I'm telling you the truth of it because you can't understand what she did to me later if you don't understand what I was when she met me. But I looked at the wiki-up, at how well it was built, and at the single small pair of moccasins drying on a rock. A child's, I thought at first, and my chest did something it hadn't done in years. And then I looked again and saw they weren't a child's. They were just small, hers, and I looked at her face. And I saw a thing I recognized the way you recognize your own reflection in a dark window when you weren't expecting it. She was carrying the same stone I was. I don't know how I knew. You'll say I couldn't have, that it's a thing I've added to the memory later to make it neater. Maybe. But I've spent my life reading the mood of animals off the smallest signs, the set of an ear, the whites of an eye. And I am telling you I looked at that woman guarding a thin spring with a knife, and I knew, bone deep and immediate, that she had buried people, and that she was doing exactly what I was doing, surviving out of pure stubbornness, because the alternative would mean admitting there was nothing left to survive for. I got down off Judith, slow. I set the rifle across the saddle where it'd take me 2 seconds to reach, and she could see that it would. "I've got cattle dying for want of water," I said. "I don't want yours, I want to share it, there's enough." She didn't answer. Later I'd learned she spoke English better than I spoke anything, that she'd learned it as a girl at an agency school she'd been dragged to and dragged back from, that she kept it hidden the way I kept my birds hidden, a thing too private to hand strangers. But that first day she just watched me water my stock at the low end of the seep while she stood at the high end with her knife, and neither of us spoke, and it was, I realized somewhere in that long hot silence, the most company I'd had in 11 years. Her name was Dottie. I wouldn't learn it for another week. When I did, she'd say it once plain and then say, "Don't wear it out," which is the first time she made me laugh, and the laugh surprised me so much I had to turn away from her so she wouldn't see what it did to my face. But that's ahead of us. That first day I watered my cattle and rode home, and I did not carve a bird, because nobody had proposed anything, and I lay awake that night not thinking about Ada, which frightened me more than any nightmare, but thinking about a pair of small moccasins drying on a rock, and a woman holding a spring against the whole hard world with nothing but a knife and the refusal to lie down. I told myself I was only worried about my water rights. I have never in my life been a good liar, least of all to myself, and the proof of it is that I was back at that seep 2 days later with no cattle at all. I brought her salt the second time. That's a foolish thing to bring a stranger, but it was what I had that she couldn't easily get, and I'd thought about it the whole ride, feeling like a boy of 16 bringing a ribbon to a barn dance, disgusted with myself and unable to stop. She was mending a snare when I rode up. She didn't reach for the knife this time, which I understood to be a larger thing than it looked. I held out the salt wrapped in cloth. "For the water," I said, "for letting me." She looked at it and at me, and something moved at the corner of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the family of one. "You bring salt," she said, in English so clean it took me a full second to catch up. "Like I am meat you are currying." I stood there like a fence post. "Sit down, cowboy," she said, going back to her snare. "You look like you'll fall over." So I sat, and that was the start of it. We didn't talk about the big things first. Nobody does, not really. The big things come out sideways, snagged on small ones. I learned that she was Chiricahua, that her band had been scattered in the surrender years, that some of her people had been loaded on trains and sent to Florida to die of damp and homesickness in a country with no horizon, and that she had gotten free of that somehow. She never told me the whole of it, and I never made her, and come back to this country because a person needs to die where the land knows their name, and if she couldn't live in her mountains, she could at least be buried looking at them. She said all this the way you'd report the weather, that flat, steady voice. It was worse than crying would have been. I learned she'd had a husband. Say she called him, which she said meant rock, and she'd laughed a dry little laugh saying it because he'd been anything but restless, funny, always leaving and coming back. He'd died in the fighting, and she'd had a son. She didn't tell me about the son for a long time. I only knew because of the moccasins which she kept and which I'd seen, and which she caught me looking at once and said, very quiet, "Don't." And I didn't, and I never asked, and that was the most tender thing that passed between us for weeks, the questions I didn't ask. Because I knew, that was the whole strange gift of it. I knew what it was to keep a dead person's small thing and not be able to give it away and not be able to look at it either. She had her moccasins. I had my birds. We were two people carrying the same stone up two different mountains, and we'd met on a thin spring between them. I started coming twice a week, then 3 times. I told myself it was neighborly, that the country was dangerous for a woman alone, that she might need things a rider could bring. All true and all a lie, in the way the most convincing lies are stitched entirely out of true thread. She teased me. That's the thing I hadn't expected. I'd braced for grief, for silence, for the careful distance between a white rancher and an Apache widow in that time and place. And instead I got teased, dryly, expertly, until I was laughing more in a month than I had in a decade. She called me cowboy like it was a mild insult. She said my Spanish was an offense to 2 languages at once. She watched me fumble the fire one evening and said, "You have lived alone 11 years and you still cannot make a fire." And I said, "How'd you know it was 11 years? And she went still, and the fire caught, and she said, "Because that is how long you have been holding your breath. I can hear it." I didn't answer that. I couldn't. I told her about Ada on a night the rain finally came. It came all at once the way it does in that country, a wall of it moving across the flats, and we sat under the edge of her wickiup and watched the drought break, and something in me broke a little with it, and it just came out. I told her about the winter fever, about being 3 days out with the herd when it took Ada and the baby both, the baby first, then Ada, who I've always believed didn't fight it as hard as she could have once the baby was gone, and who could blame her. I told her about riding back to a house gone silent and a neighbor woman who wouldn't meet my eyes, and the 2 fresh graves the men had already dug because you can't wait on a fever, and how I never once got to. I stopped. "You never got to say the thing, Dottie," I said. "No. So you have been saying it ever since, to no one, in a box." She looked at me across the small fire. "The birds." I hadn't told her about the birds. I want that clear. I had never told a living soul about the birds. "Cora Harmon has a mouth on her," she said, watching my face. "News travels even to a woman on a mountain, cowboy. They say the ward who wards everybody off keeps a box of little birds, one for every woman he sends away. They think it is a cruelty, a trophy." "It isn't." "I know what it is," she said. "It is not a trophy. It is a grave. You dig one every time so you never have to dig the real one. You bury a bird so you never have to bury her." She looked into the fire. "I know. I have my own kind. Mine has small feet." The rain came down. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she said the thing that I've carried ever since, though it wasn't yet the thing that stopped me cold, that came later at the worst moment, and I'll get there. This was gentler. "When my son died," she said, "I wanted to die in the same hour. I did not." "Do you know why?" "No." "Because there was no one to bury me. And a person who dies with no one to bury them is truly finished. They go into the ground like a stranger. So I kept living at first, only so that when I died there might be someone who knew my name to say it over me. That is a poor reason to live, cowboy. I do not recommend it." She almost smiled. "But it is a reason, and a poor reason will carry you further than no reason at all. I have learned this." I understood then that she was the strongest person I had ever met, and that her strength had cost her everything, and that it was not the strength people meant when they praised it in others, not proud, not loud. It was just the refusal to lie down, same as mine. Except that mine had turned into a box of birds, and hers had turned into a woman who could still, somehow, laugh at a fool trying to build a fire. I rode home in the wet dark, and I did not carve a bird, and I understood, somewhere near the halfway mark of that long ride, that I was in trouble of a kind I had sworn 11 years ago never to be in again. The hard decision came at the end of the summer, and it was mine to make, and it broke something. Men in Sage Fork had gotten word there was a Apache up in the foothills. Just one woman, but that was enough. There'd been a scare over some stolen horses 2 counties away, nothing to do with her, everything to do with fear, and a few of the harder men, led by a rancher named Blister Coe who hated Indians the way some men hate weather, got up a notion to ride into the hills and clear them out. A woman alone, Coe and 5 others. I heard about it in the Mercantile from Delia Prude of all people, who said it like gossip, like weather. "They're going up after that squaw at the seep tomorrow," and something went white and cold in me right there among the flour barrels. Here was my decision. I could warn her, and by warning her mark myself in front of the whole town as the man who took the Apache's side, which in that country in that year was a thing you did not walk back from. Or I could ride up and try to move her, get her deeper into country Coe wouldn't follow into, which meant she'd lose the seep, the wickiup, the one small place she'd built. Or I could stand between her and 6 armed men and likely get us both killed. Or I could do nothing and keep my standing, my ranch, my quiet stone life, and let her be a thing that had happened to me once and ended. I want you to understand that a younger man, the man I'd been for 11 years, would have thought about it longer than I did. I didn't think about it at all in the end. I was already saddling Judith before I'd finished being ashamed of having considered the last option for even a second. I rode up in the dark, I told her. And this is the part I didn't expect, she got angry, not at me. I run, she said. Again, I have run my whole life, Cowboy, from the trains, from the school, from men on horses, and now from you, from your town, from your fear. She was packing as she said it, hands quick and furious. And you will go back down and be the good rancher, and next month a woman in walking shoes will come to your barn, and you will carve your bird, and you will call it faithfulness, and you will die in your box. She stopped. She looked at me. I thought you were done being a stone. I was wrong. A stone at least does not pretend. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me, and it was completely fair, and I stood there and took it because I had earned it. We moved her that night, deeper into a canyon she knew, harder to find. Co rode up to an empty seep the next day and burned the wickiup out of spite and rode home and told everyone he'd run the Apache off and got drunk on it for a week. And I let him, because a lie that keeps her safe is a lie I'll swallow every time. But something had changed between us, and not for the better. She'd shown me the floor of her anger, and under it was the truth, that I'd offered her nothing but a warning and a longer run, that I'd risked my standing but not my life, not really, not my heart, never my heart. That box was still under my floor, 31 birds. And I'd have carved a 32nd before I'd have said the word she was actually asking me to say, which she had never once said out loud, because she was too proud, and because she'd learned that wanting things out loud got them taken from you. We didn't speak for 2 weeks. It was the longest 2 weeks I'd lived since the fever winter. She sent word through Tamaz, my old hand, who it turned out had known her people for years. The country is smaller than the men who run it like to think. The message was 4 words. Come, I am sick. I have never ridden Judith harder. She wasn't sick the way I feared, not the fever. It was her lungs, a thing she'd carried since the damp years running, that flared when the cold came early that fall. And when I found her in the canyon, she was gray and shaking and burning by turns, wrapped in every hide she owned, too proud even then to look glad I'd come. You took long enough, she said and coughed, and it was a terrible sound, wet and deep. I got her warm. I got broth into her. I stayed. For 11 days I stayed in that canyon and did not ride down to my ranch and did not care what 40 head of cattle did without me, because for the first time in 11 years there was a thing in the world I was more afraid of losing than my own carefully tended emptiness. And she got worse before she got better, and there was a night, the worst night, when her breathing went to a rattle, and I sat holding her hand, and I did the thing I had not done since the fever winter. I begged, not out loud, to whatever's up there. I said, not this one too. You can have the rest of it, the ranch, the years, the box. I'll burn the box myself, just not this one. And somewhere in that night I understood what I was really bargaining. It wasn't her life against my things. It was her life against my grief. I'd been holding 8 or 11 years by holding everyone else away. And here I was, ready to set Ada down, to open my hands, to let a new person be more important than my faithfulness to a dead one, if it would just keep this stubborn, impossible woman breathing till morning. She breathed till morning, and the next. On the 12th day the fever broke and she woke up clear-eyed and looked at me sitting there gray and hollow beside her and said, "You look worse than me." And I put my face in my hands and I wept, 11 years of it all at once, and she let me and did not say a word, and that silence was the kindest thing anyone had ever given me. When she was strong enough, I brought the box. I don't fully know why. I'd ridden down for supplies and I stood in my own bedroom with the floorboard up and the cigar box in my hands, and I thought she should see it. She should see the whole of what she's asking to take on. So I brought it, 31 birds. I set it on the hide beside her and I opened the lid and I said, "This is it. This is the thing everybody talks about. This is what I am instead of a husband." She looked at them a long time. She picked up the owl, the one I was proud of, and turned it in her fingers. Then she looked at me, and here it is, the thing I've been carrying you toward, the quiet words that stopped me cold. She didn't tell me to move on. She didn't say I deserved to be happy. She didn't say Ada would want me to live. I'd have hated that, and she knew it. She said something worse and truer and smaller than any of that. You carve them wings, she said, and you never once opened the box. That was all, 7 words, if you count them the way she did. You carve them wings, and you never once opened the box. I want to tell you I understood it right away. I didn't. It sat in me for a full minute, this small, plain sentence, and then it went off like a charge under a stump, and the whole rotten root of 11 years came up out of the ground at once. I'd given every one of them wings. Sparrows, wrens, the owl, wings, the one thing a bird is for. And I'd shut them in the dark under a floorboard where no wing was any use to anyone, 31 small made things that could have flown and never would, because the man who made them couldn't bear to open his hands. I hadn't been keeping faith with Ada. I'd been doing to those birds exactly what grief had done to me, building something with wings and burying it alive. She watched me understand it. She'd known it would take a minute. She was a patient woman about the things that mattered. My son's feet, she said, quiet, nodding at the moccasins she kept near her head. I will never give them away. I will die with them. That is not the same as what you have done, Cowboy. I do not put new small feet in a box every time a child laughs near me. You make a new grave every time someone offers you a life. Cora, the others, and now me. She set the owl down gently in the box and closed the lid and pushed it toward me. I am not asking to be a bird. I am asking you to open the box. That is all I have ever asked, not to replace her, to let the wings out. I sat there with a closed cigar box in my lap and a woman I loved looking at me with the last of a fever still in her face, and I understood that this was the proposal, the real one, the one I'd spent 11 years and 31 birds refusing before it ever got asked. She wasn't asking me to marry her. She was too proud and too honest for that. She knew we'd likely not get to grow old, that the country would never fully let us be, that her lungs might not see many more winters. She was asking something both smaller and enormous. Open the box. Let the wings out. Stop digging graves for the living. I'd like to tell you what I said. The truth is I didn't say anything at first. I've never been good with the words at the moment they're most needed. You know that about me by now, and the biggest thing I ever felt arrived, as the biggest things always do for me, with my mouth empty and my hands doing the talking. I opened the box. I took out the owl, her owl, the one she'd held, and I turned it in my fingers the way she had. And then I got up, and I walked out of the canyon to the lip where you can see clear across the flats to the mountains going blue in the evening, and I held that owl up in the last of the light. And then I opened my hand. I let it fall. It was only wood. It didn't fly. It dropped and clattered down the rocks and was gone into the scrub below. But something did fly, somewhere in me, some grief bird 11 years caged, and I stood on that edge with my empty hands still open, and I felt the wind come up cold off the peaks. And behind me I heard her sick laughing, that low Creek-Underice laugh, so like and unlike another laugh from another life. And I heard her say, "One down, Cowboy. 30 to go." I went back and knelt by her, and I finally found a few words, and they weren't grand. I said, "I don't know how much time you've got, your lungs." "No one knows how much time anyone has," she said. "You of all people know that." "I want it anyway," I said. "Whatever it is, however short, I'd rather bury you knowing your name than keep carving birds another 11 years. My voice did something. "I'd rather have the winter with you than the rest of my life as a stone." She looked at me a long moment, and the teasing went out of her face, and what was under it was very tender and very tired and unbearably brave. "Then take the box home," she said, "and open it, not all at once. You are not ready for all at once, one at a time, and when it is empty." She stopped. She was so tired. I waited for the rest of it. I'm still, in a way I can't explain to you, waiting for the rest of it. Because she smiled, that not quite smile in the family of one, and she closed her eyes, and she never did tell me what was supposed to happen when the box was empty. And I have had to find out on my own, one bird at a time every year since, up on that ridge with my hand open to the